What if one of the most powerful tornadoes in modern American history wasn't fully recognized until months later? On the night of June 20th, 2025, something terrifying tore across North Dakota, leaving behind destruction so extreme that even experts struggled to explain it. A freight train was thrown hundreds of feet. Entire homes vanished. Trees were stripped bare. And yet, at first, it was not classified as the worst kind of storm. So what really happened that night? Was the danger underestimated, or was something overlooked? As investigators dug deeper, the truth became more shocking than anyone expected. This wasn't just another tornado, it was a once-in-a-generation event hiding in plain sight. Stay with this story because every detail matters. And if you want more real, gripping stories like this, hit subscribe and stay tuned for what others miss. On June 20th, 1957, the quiet city of Fargo, North Dakota, was forever changed when a powerful EF5 tornado tore through the area. The storm claimed 10 lives and left a deep mark not just on the community, but on the entire field of weather science. In the aftermath, a scientist named Dr. Ted Fujita carefully studied the destruction. What he learned from Fargo became the foundation for a new way to measure tornado strength. His work led to the creation of the Fujita scale, which would later evolve into the system still used today to classify tornadoes. Terms now common in storm forecasting, like wall cloud, were shaped by this very event. The Fargo tornado was not just a tragedy. It became a turning point that helped scientists better understand the most violent storms on Earth. Nearly 7 decades later, the United States entered another period of unusually intense weather. The year 2024 stood out as one of the most active tornado years ever recorded, with over 2,100 tornadoes documented nationwide. It was the highest total since records began in 1950. This surge in activity raised concern among meteorologists heading into the following year. By the time 2025 arrived, the atmosphere already seemed primed for more severe outbreaks. Storm experts were watching closely, especially across the central and northern plains, where conditions often align for dangerous weather. June 2025 brought no relief. Instead, it delivered the kind of setup that storm chasers and forecasters both recognize as a warning sign. On June 15, 2025, meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center began identifying troubling patterns forming across the region. A mid-level ridge of high pressure was moving into the upper Mississippi River Valley, while beneath it, a large mass of warm, moist, unstable air stretched from the Missouri River Valley into the western Great Lakes. This combination is known to fuel severe thunderstorms. At the same time, strong winds at different levels of the atmosphere created deep layer wind shear, a key ingredient for rotating storms. These conditions were not just favorable, they were highly concerning. Forecasters knew that if storms developed in this environment, they could quickly become dangerous. As the week progressed, the setup only intensified. By the morning of June 20th, 2025, all the ingredients were in place. It was a Friday, and across eastern North Dakota, life continued as usual. In small towns like Enderlin, families were going about their routines, unaware of what was building in the sky. Fields swayed in the summer breeze, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But far to the west, the atmosphere was already becoming unstable. At 1:30 in the afternoon, officials issued Tornado Watch number 341, covering a large portion of the region. This meant conditions were favorable for tornadoes to form. The warning was serious, but in rural areas, such alerts are not uncommon during storm season. By early evening, storms began to take shape. Supercells, the most dangerous type of thunderstorm, started developing near the Jamestown area. At first, these storms were elevated, meaning they were not yet fully connected to the surface. But as the evening went on, a strengthening low-level jet stream pulled them downward, turning them into surface-based storms, which are far more capable of producing tornadoes. Before the main tornado even formed, several others had already touched down. an EF3 tornado near Spiritwood, and 2 EF2 tornadoes near Valley City and Fort Ransom were reported. All of them were moving in similar directions, converging toward the same region. This was a clear signal that the situation was escalating. At 8:15 p.m., forecasters issued an updated warning. They stated that storms were entering a favorable environment and that strong tornadoes were expected. Wind speeds were estimated to reach between 120 and 150 miles per hour, which is already destructive. Emergency managers began activating response plans, knowing that the threat was real. Still, there were limits to what could be done. In rural North Dakota, many homes do not have basements, and public storm shelters are not always available. When warnings come at night, the danger increases even more. People must rely on whatever shelter they have and hope it will be enough. The stage was now fully set, and everything pointed toward a major event about to unfold. At 11:02 p.m. on June 20th, 2025, the storm finally produced the tornado that forecasters had feared. It touched down just south of Enderlin, North Dakota, at first appearing small and almost unremarkable. Early observers described it as narrow, with limited strength, consistent with an EF0 tornado. But within moments, everything began to change. The funnel widened, its rotation tightened, and the winds began to accelerate at an alarming rate. It started small, but it didn't stay that way, one storm chaser reported, as lightning flashes briefly revealed the growing shape. In the darkness of the rural plains, the tornado was becoming something far more dangerous than anyone on the ground could fully see. By 11:05 p.m., the tornado had already strengthened to EF2 intensity as it crossed near the ADM edible bean facility southeast of Enderlin. Large trees snapped instantly, buildings were torn apart, and debris began to scatter across open farmland. What made this moment especially terrifying was not just the damage, but the speed of the intensification. This was not a slow-building storm. It was escalating in minutes. As the tornado moved northeast, its structure became more defined and far more violent. Witnesses described a massive dark shape illuminated only by lightning, growing wider and more powerful with each passing second. Just minutes later, at around 11:08 p.m., the tornado reached a point that would later define its place in history. As it crossed the CPKC rail line southeast of Enderlin, a freight train was sitting on the tracks. What happened next shocked even experienced meteorologists. Multiple rail cars were violently thrown from the tracks. An empty tanker car weighing 72,000 pounds was hurled nearly 475 feet through the air, while fully loaded grain cars weighing over 280,000 pounds each were tipped over like toys. This was no longer a strong tornado. This was extreme, experts would later conclude. The level of force required to move objects of that size could only be explained by winds exceeding 210 miles per hour, placing the tornado firmly in EF5 territory. As the tornado continued its path, it left behind a trail of destruction that was both wide and intense. A cell tower collapsed, cutting off communication across parts of the region. Crops were shredded into the ground, and entire sections of farmland were stripped bare. The tornado was now more than a mile wide in some areas, a massive rotating force moving steadily northeast. The power of the storm was overwhelming, and for those in its path, there was little warning of just how severe it had become. In rural areas, where homes are spread far apart, the isolation made the situation even more dangerous. At approximately 11:15 p.m., the tornado struck one of the hardest hit locations along Highway 46, just east of Enderlin. Inside a home, Michael and Catherine Dane, both 73 years old, had taken shelter after receiving warnings. They had done what they were supposed to do. They followed safety guidance and stayed inside. But against a tornado of this magnitude, even the best preparation is not always enough. The storm hit their home directly, completely destroying the structure. Both lost their lives in the collapse, marking the first confirmed fatalities of the night. It was a tragic reminder that even when people act quickly, extreme tornadoes can overpower nearly any shelter. Not far from there, another life was lost under similar circumstances. Marcario Lucio, 89 years old, was at his home north of the Dane residence when the tornado struck. His house was also completely obliterated. Emergency responders would later find that he did not survive. These losses brought the total number of fatalities to 3, each occurring despite attempts to seek safety. They did everything right, and it still wasn't enough, responders would later reflect. The human cost of the storm was now clear, even as the tornado continued moving forward. Beyond the homes, the tornado inflicted devastating damage on the natural landscape. Entire farmsteads were wiped away, with buildings reduced to scattered debris. But perhaps the most striking evidence of the storm's intensity was seen in the trees. In several areas, forests were not just damaged, they were completely destroyed. Trees were snapped down to their stumps or torn entirely from the ground, roots exposed and scattered. In some cases, debris traveled so far that investigators could not determine where it had originally come from. The bark on many trees had been stripped away, a sign of extreme wind speeds and airborne debris acting like sandpaper. This level of destruction is rarely seen and is often used as a key indicator of the most powerful tornadoes. Finally, at around 11:21 p.m., the tornado began to weaken and eventually dissipated near the town of Alice, North Dakota. It had been on the ground for approximately 19 minutes, traveling about 12 miles and reaching a width of over 1 mile at its peak. In less than half an hour, it had transformed from a small funnel into one of the most violent storms in modern history. 19 minutes that would change everything, one observer later described. The damage path it left behind would take years to fully recover from, and the true strength of the tornado was only beginning to be understood. In the immediate aftermath of the storm, the response began almost instantly. By around 11:40 p.m., storm chasers who had been tracking the tornado arrived at some of the hardest hit areas. What they found was devastating. Homes were gone, debris was scattered across fields, and entire sections of land were unrecognizable. They quickly realized this was not an ordinary disaster and contacted local authorities without hesitation. Emergency crews from the Enderlin Fire Department, along with deputies and ambulance teams from across the region, mobilized in the darkness. Every structure had to be checked, responders said, as they began a careful search through damaged homes and farmland, looking for survivors in the middle of the night. Through the early hours of June 21st, 2025, rescue teams conducted a full grid search across the tornado's path. Fire departments from nearby towns like Alice, along with the Cass County Sheriff's Office and the North Dakota Highway Patrol, worked together to reach every impacted location. The conditions made their job extremely difficult. Power was out across large areas, communication systems had been knocked offline, and debris blocked many rural roads. Still, crews pushed forward, checking each site one by one. It was during this search that responders confirmed the 3 fatalities. "It was one of the hardest nights we've ever faced," one official later said, reflecting on the scale of destruction and the emotional toll on first responders. By 7:30 a.m., as daylight revealed the full extent of the damage, Cass County Sheriff Jesse Jana addressed the public. He confirmed 3 deaths, widespread destruction, and a community in shock. The damage zone stretched several miles across farmland, with homes completely leveled and infrastructure heavily damaged. At first, the tornado was rated as an EF5, based on initial observations of the destruction. But even then, many experts suspected the storm might be stronger. "We knew this was significant, but we didn't yet know how extreme," one meteorologist explained. Across the state, the storm's impact was widespread. Around 37,000 people lost power, and communication networks remained down in multiple areas. Later that same day, Governor Kelly Armstrong declared a statewide disaster, activating emergency response systems and opening the door for aid and recovery efforts. But what stood out most in the days that followed was not just the official response, but the way the community came together. Within days, more than 150 volunteers joined cleanup efforts, helping families search for belongings and clear debris. Organizations like the Red Cross provided support, while drone teams from the Northern Plains UAS test site helped locate personal items scattered miles away. Local groups set up relief funds, and neighbors worked side by side to rebuild what they could. People showed up for each other, residents said, describing the sense of unity that formed in the wake of the disaster. On June 25th, Governor Armstrong visited the affected areas in person. He met with survivors, including Tyler Fashing, whose home had been destroyed during the storm. Fashing described the moment he received the alert on his phone, warning that he was in extreme danger. He took shelter in his bathroom as the tornado passed overhead, surviving despite losing nearly everything. His story reflected both the terror of that night and the resilience that followed. Armstrong described the tornado as a once-in-a-generation event and acknowledged that while the destruction was overwhelming, the response from the community was inspiring. Watching nature do this is terrible, but watching people come together is powerful, he said. As recovery efforts continued into the summer, attention turned to understanding what had really happened. Scientists from the National Weather Service in Grand Forks, along with research teams from Canada and wind damage experts, began a detailed investigation. They studied every part of the damage path, from destroyed homes to uprooted trees. But one piece of evidence stood out above all others. The freight train that had been thrown from the tracks became the key to unlocking the tornado's true strength. Experts calculated the force required to move rail cars of that size and determined that the winds must have far exceeded earlier estimates. The physics didn't lie, one researcher explained. The numbers pointed clearly to extreme wind speeds well above 200 miles per hour. Over the following months, teams analyzed additional indicators, including the complete removal of structures from their foundations and the severe damage to trees. These findings confirmed what many had begun to suspect. Then, on October 6, 2025, the National Weather Service made a historic announcement. The tornado was officially upgraded to EF5, with winds exceeding 210 miles per hour. This was the first EF5 tornado in the United States since 2013, ending a 12-year gap without a storm of that classification. It also became one of only a few EF5 tornadoes ever recorded in North Dakota history. The upgrade changed how the event would be remembered, placing it among the most powerful tornadoes ever documented. Despite the recognition, challenges remained. Federal disaster relief had been approved later that year, but distribution was delayed due to an ongoing government shutdown. Families who had lost homes and livelihoods were forced to rely on local support and volunteer aid instead of immediate federal assistance. We had help, but not the kind we expected, residents said, describing the frustration and uncertainty. Even so, the rebuilding continued. The recovery process was expected to take years, but the determination of the community never faded. The storm had caused immense loss, but it also revealed something just as powerful. The tornado took homes, but it didn't take the people's spirit, one volunteer said. As the months passed, the Enderlin tornado of June 20th, 2025 became more than just a tragic event. It became part of scientific study, a case that would help improve future warnings and understanding of extreme storms. Researchers used the data collected to refine models and improve forecasting techniques. The event also served as a reminder of how quickly conditions can escalate and how important preparation remains. Even with modern technology, nature can still surprise us, experts noted. What happened that night would be remembered not only for its destruction, but for the lessons it provided and the resilience it revealed. 19 minutes, 3 lives lost, a community forever changed. the Enderlin tornado proved that even with warnings and science, nature can still overpower everything we know. But it also revealed something just as powerful: people who refused to break. From first responders to volunteers, the recovery became a story of resilience as much as destruction. And as science continues to learn from this event, one truth remains clear: the next storm is always coming. If you found this story gripping and want to uncover more real events like this, don't forget to subscribe and follow for the next deep dive.